Okay, so today we are going to finish reading through the first 6 chapters of Daniel, Daniel 3 through 6. I would have liked to have been able to get this done yesterday. That was my goal, but I knew that was going to be difficult because Daniel was going to require such a lengthy introduction that it was going to be hard for my voice to last all throughout that, plus the 6 first chapters that I wanted to read, as well as the fact that I knew I was going to need my voice that evening when my brother came for our weekly evening visits. And he did come, and I did speak with him for several hours, so I needed to save my voice. And so after getting through chapter 2 last week, I decided that, or yesterday, not last week, yesterday, I decided that was enough. So today we're going to finish with 3, 4, 5, and 6. These are all fairly simple chapters, unlike 2, which gave us this great preview of the future, and then 7 through 12, which gives us more information, more details about that future. Nothing like that is to be found in chapters 3 through 6. And so this is not going to be all that difficult. Now, there is going to be some historical information that we're going to talk about as we go. But for the most part, the theology of this section is pretty apparent in the text itself. Like, there isn't a lot of extra teaching or preaching that's really required here beyond what the text itself says. Some of these are children's Bible stories, and some of these are some of the most famous and well-known stories in the entire Scripture, so, including this one right here, Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. There's a footnote down here giving us cubits. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, I don't know if we've identified exactly where the plain of Dura is. We have never found this statue. Now, we have found mounds that may correspond to the pedestal of the statue. Who knows? We've never found the statue itself. If it had gold on it, it was inevitably, I'm sure, taken eventually and melted down and used for something else. It probably wasn't solid gold. It may have been, but it probably wasn't. It was probably in the figure of a man. Now, the dimensions here, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, aren't human dimensions. So that 90 feet high probably refers to some sort of pedestal it was standing on, or a base. And it was probably in the form of a human. Whether or not it was in the form of Nebuchadnezzar himself is a question. It's really hard to say. It doesn't say. It does not say that it was in the statue in the form of Nebuchadnezzar himself. It stands to reason that it might have been, but it doesn't actually say that. So we shouldn't speak with authority as though this is a statue of Nebuchadnezzar himself, because the text doesn't actually say that. It may have been a statue of his god, Marduk, that he personified somehow. Babylonian belief systems did not necessarily equate their kings with God. Some cultures did, some cultures didn't. In some cultures, the king himself was supposed to be God, or a son of God. And in some cultures, the king was simply a chosen representative of God. And so I don't know if Nebuchadnezzar himself thought of himself as God. But I don't know. My personal belief, I don't know how much longer after chapter 2 this is taking place. Chapter 2 gives us the year. It was the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, so pretty early. He ended up reigning for like 43 years. This was year 2. That was about 603 BC or so. And I don't know how long after that chapter 3 happened. Chapter 3 doesn't give us any chronological information. I think it's the next. I thought my video had stopped there for a moment. The first 6 chapters of Daniel, which are all about various events in the life of Daniel or his friends, as the case is in chapter 3, do seem to are laid out in chronological sequencing. So I believe this is probably the next thing that happened. I believe this is after chapter 4 and before chapter 2. But that could be a long time. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years. Chapter 2 took place in the second year of his reign. Chapter 4 probably takes place near the end of his reign. So there's a long period of time in which this may have happened. My guess is, my personal belief is that after his dream in chapter 2, which you read about, and after getting the interpretation of the dream from Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar began thinking about that, and he thought about that, and he thought about that. I don't know how long, A year, 2 years, 10 years, I don't know. But he thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and ultimately decided that he was annoyed probably by two things. He was annoyed by the fact that the statue, this great and glorious statue that he saw, would end up being destroyed. And I think he was probably more specifically annoyed by the fact that he was only the head of gold. I think he wanted to be the whole statue. I think he wanted to make the whole statue of gold and make himself the statue. So my personal belief is that, and I don't know if it took him 2 years to get to this point, or 5 years, or 7 years, or 10 years, I don't know. The text does not give us a date for when this happened. But my personal belief is that the events of this chapter, Nebuchadnezzar erecting this statue, was an attempt by him to establish himself as this dominant figure. I wouldn't be a bit surprised even, whatever the statue was, whether it was himself or just some generic looking ruler guy, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if in Nebuchadnezzar's mind he saw this statue as his attempt at making the statue he had seen in his dream. And he was going to make himself gold, and he was not going to be just the head, he was going to be the whole statue, and he wanted to last forever. I wouldn't be a bit, it doesn't say that, the text does not say that. The text does not specifically ascribe that motivation to Nebuchadnezzar here, but I would not be a bit surprised that that's what was going on in his mind. Anyway, so King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Again, I don't know if that's pure gold or just overlaid with gold. Most likely, most practically, it was simply overlaid with gold. The temple was overlaid with gold. The Ark of the Covenant was overlaid with gold. The Ark of the Covenant was not solid gold. It had a wooden base inside it, but it was overlaid with gold. The temple was overlaid with gold, despite being made of wood and stone. So this probably is not a solid gold statue, although it's possible. Nebuchadnezzar probably did have access to enough gold to make a statue like this out of pure gold, but it probably was not. And so it really wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things, like whether it was made of pure gold or simply overlaid with gold. From looking at it, it wouldn't make a difference. It would look like it was of gold. I mean, you wouldn't really know the difference if you're just looking at it from a distance. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, I think, again, the text, Daniel is not going to be present in this chapter. For some reason, he just isn't mentioned at all. The text itself does not explain why. My guess is that if the text of the book of Daniel addresses this issue at all, which it doesn't in chapter 3, but if the text attempts to explain it, it probably is here at the end of chapter 2, where the distinction is made that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were apprenticers over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself ran the royal court. That could be the author's attempt at explaining why Daniel was not present for this scene, because it was taking place somewhere else. He was in the royal court, and this was taking place in the plains of Babylon somewhere, where his friends had been stationed, and for whatever the reason, the rule just didn't apply to him, or the consequences of breaking the rule were not applied to him. I just don't know. Okay, I just don't know. There's a lot that isn't said. I mentioned this a video or two ago. There's a lot that is not said in the scriptures. You know, if the scriptures answered every question we would like them to answer, you know, it's like it would be 10 times as long as it actually is. I mean, I have a book back there in the bedroom that I took out from the library called Ancient Near Eastern Texts. It was written in the 50s, and it was a compilation of a sum of the transcribed materials, translated materials that had already been found and discovered. By then, that was 70 years ago. This is like 1955 when that was published, and that was close to 70 years ago now. And that had been in the first 100 years or so of archaeological expeditions, and that was even only a sampling. That was only a sampling of some of the material that had already been translated by that time, 70 years ago now. And even that is twice as long as this. So it's like it's a thick book about this big, and it's huge too. It's not just, I mean, it's a thick textbook with like trapper keeper size dimensions. Like, it's huge. And that was only a sampling of what they'd already transcribed or translated 70 years ago, let alone all the stuff they found and translated since then, or even at that time. Like, that wasn't even a sampling only of what they had at that time. So there's a lot. There's a lot that could be mentioned. There's a lot of detail that could be included that in Scripture just is not included. Okay? Daniel could have made it clearer where he was during this scene and why he was not apparently present with the others during this encounter, but he didn't. His closest explanation may be that he was in the royal court and they were out there in the province, and maybe in his mind that explains it. You know, I don't know. I just don't know. Anyway, so Nebuchadnezzar has set up his statue. Whether it's a statue of himself or a statue of some other figure, who knows? We just don't know. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. God dedicated. It can't just exist. You've got to dedicate it. Even in the pagan, like, you have to breathe life into your idol somehow. Even when you would make an idol and set up in your house, your own household idol, you had to perform some sort of dedication ceremony to imbue that idol with power. Obviously, you weren't actually doing anything. But even in the pagan cultures of their own household shrines and idols, they had to do something to dedicate that idol to make it effective, make it come alive somehow. It couldn't just be made and sit there. You know, they had to do something to imbue it with life and power. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials, we're going to see that a lot, by the way, in this section, assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." And they had these furnaces set up everywhere because they use these furnaces to melt their metals and make their stuff with. So the furnace itself is not all that unusual. And even throwing people in furnaces is not all that unusual. We've already read about Nebuchadnezzar doing exactly this to people before. Jeremiah 29 mentions two guys in particular that Nebuchadnezzar is going to burn up, or has burned up. Actually, where are we specifically here? Okay. Jeremiah 29 is the copy of the letter that Jeremiah sent to the exiles. Jeremiah was in Jerusalem. He never went to Babylon. He sent messengers to Babylon. He talked to messengers who came from Babylon, and he sent messages to Babylon. But he himself was not in Babylon. He was never taken captive to Babylon. And he wrote a letter to the exiles. Remember, the exiles went to Babylon in waves, and so he was in the city up until its fall and even afterwards. So some of the people who had already been taken, including Daniel and Ezekiel, he's sending them a letter. And he's telling them to take comfort and to just live their lives. They're in Babylon. They're not coming home anytime soon. And not to listen to the false prophets who are saying they are going to come home soon. In chapter 29, verse 20, he says this, "Therefore, because of all of this," he just got done saying, in verses 1 to 19, "Hear the word of the Lord, all you exiles whom I have sent away from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says about Ahab, son of Kolaiah, and Zedekiah, son of Maaseiah, who are prophesying lies to you in my name. I will hand them over to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he will put them to death before your very eyes. Because of them, all the exiles from Judah who are in Babylon will use this curse. The Lord treat you like Zedekiah and Ahab, whom the king of Babylon burned in the fire." So Nebuchadnezzar had a habit of putting people in furnaces. We know of two examples already that he's done this to. And who knows how many other people he threw in a furnace. He threatened to tear up his own wise men and cut them into pieces in chapter 2 and reduce their houses to rubble. He was quite pleased with his ability to end people's lives at a moment's notice, and he was not shy of using that ability. So anyway, therefore, chapter 3, verse 7. As soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. These musical instruments, by the way, I don't know which one. There's a bunch of them mentioned here. There's a few of these words that are Grecian words that refer to Grecian instruments. And of course, because of this, the smart people say that means the whole book was written in the time of Greece. But if that were the case, if the whole book in fact was written 300 or 400 years later during the time of the Grecian Empire's dominance, we'd have a whole lot more words in the text than just 3 that are from Greece, that are Grecian in nature. And we have evidence that Grecian instruments and Grecian slaves were in this region of the world even before the time of Daniel. Even down the time of Assyria, a couple hundred years before this, when Assyria was a big deal in the 700s BC, we already have evidence of Grecian instruments and Grecian poets and Grecian slaves being in Assyria at this time. So the presence of 3 Greek instrument words here does not establish that the book was written in the time of Greece. In fact, if anything, the fact that those are the only Grecian words itself is evidence that this book was not written during the time of Greece. Otherwise, there would be far more. I don't know these instruments, what these words refer to exactly. You know, instruments change. Different people. An instrument is essentially anything you make to help you make music with. So there's lots of instruments that people can make over the years that come and go, and different cultures have different kinds of instruments. I don't know how precise we can be with some of these things, but these are the words that the translators of this edition have decided to use to communicate the thought, at least as best as they know how. This seems to be like an actual choir or orchestra. There are so many instruments mentioned here that the idea that's being communicated here seems to be that this is like the official orchestra playing. I don't know if it played at certain times of the day, like at 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. I don't know. Or if it was random and spontaneous, and just whenever it played, you were supposed to drop whatever it was you were doing and bow down. It seems like that might be the case, but I don't know. I don't know how regularly scheduled these performances were, but it seems as though this was some kind of an orchestral performance. But I just don't know. I don't know how this would actually have worked in practice, honestly. At any rate, we're continuing on. So that's what's happening. The conditions here are that Nebuchadnezzar has made a statue. He's likely done so motivated by the dream he had in chapter 2. I don't know how much time has passed, but it seems like he's been thinking about this. He wants to make himself the statue and make the statue great. So he's trying to make that happen. It seems like it to me. That's just the impression I get. And so he's trying to get people to bow down to this statue. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. People have been doing that forever. That is not anything new. Denouncing the Jews is nothing new. Right now, as I speak, in December 2022, December 7th to be specific, Wednesday morning, well actually Wednesday early afternoon now, 1:15 noon, on December 7th, 2022, we're having controversies again about people who have been speaking badly about the Jews. There have been a couple of high-profile celebrities in recent weeks who have been making up all kinds of crazy stories about the Jews. It's been happening for thousands of years. We have had, the rest of the world, us Gentiles, we have had a problem with these Jews since the days of Pharaoh in Egypt, 3,400 years ago. Maybe even Ishmael, in the days of Abraham and Isaac, when Isaac was born, Ishmael made fun of him as a 13-year-old kid. You know, that was 3,800 years ago. Like, we have a problem with these Jews. We can't stomach the thought that these people have been chosen by God to lead humanity to the promised land. Like, it's just a problem for us. We have to figure out some way to get rid of them. And they're doing that here. Okay? The Babylonian astrologers, or Chaldeans, however you want to call it, are doing that here. Now, they probably had been resentful of these guys ever since they were promoted above them sometime earlier. These men are probably still young. This is probably not happening that long after chapter 2. I don't know if it's right after, but it's probably not that long after. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years, and this is probably happening relatively early in his reign still. I don't think it's happening later on. I don't think so. I don't think so. This is probably happening fairly early, so these men would still be fairly young. We essentially saw their high school graduation in chapter 1. And it was right around that same time, either just before or just after chapter 2 happened. And so and this isn't probably that long after that. So they're probably still young in their 20s, maybe even their early 20s still, or mid-20s is the latest. They're still young men, I think. I think it's safe to say they're still young men. And these guys, probably these other guys who were who saw these three young captives, these foreigners, these Jews, get promoted above them, have probably been resentful of them ever since. We know this happens in chapter 6 with Daniel. And Daniel, by that point, is an older statesman in his 80s who's been in the administrative functions, who's been capably performing in administrative functions for 70 years. And he still provokes jealousy in the hearts of his peers. So this is probably motivated by jealousy by these guys who saw these three young captive upstarts get promoted ahead of them. And they've been probably looking... Now, in chapter 6, we're going to find out that the whole plot was based on the jealousy of Daniel's peers who wanted to get rid of him because they just didn't like him. And here, it doesn't say that. Chapter 3, this all seems to emanate from the mind of Nebuchadnezzar himself, and he was doing this without being prompted into doing it by the advisors. But I think these men are still motivated by the same jealousy that Daniel's enemies will be motivated by in chapter 6. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Those are their Babylonian names, not their Hebrew names, which are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. "Who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Uh-oh, that's a problem. We've seen Nebuchadnezzar, and we've seen how he reacts when people don't do what he wants already. We've seen his tendency to cut people up and throw them into the fire and reduce their houses to rubble. So now what's he going to do? He's going to do exactly what you think he's going to do. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, he would know these guys. Okay, he promoted them. He put them ahead of his own, Chaldean sorcerers. Okay, and they're disappointing him. They're disappointed. He had confidence in them. He believed in them. Daniel recommended them to him, and he acted on that recommendation by promoting them, and now they're letting him down. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. So he's giving him another chance. He probably likes them enough to give them this other chance. If he didn't like them, he might not give them another chance. The fact that he's giving them a chance now probably speaks to the fact that he would rather not throw them in the furnace. He wants them to pass this test and not have to be thrown in the furnace. If he didn't like them, he probably wouldn't be giving them this other extra chance. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? And Nebuchadnezzar did acknowledge the God of Daniel, the end of chapter 2, as the revealer of mysteries. Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. So you're able to reveal this mystery. But he doesn't necessarily acknowledge him as the Lord of fire, or the Lord of all gods. Okay, there's a difference. Nebuchadnezzar at this point in time probably has no difficulty accepting Daniel's God as a real God, and with the specialty of revealing secrets and mysteries. That doesn't mean he worships Daniel's God, or that he thinks Daniel's God can protect people from fire. We'll go ahead and finish the story in the next video.